You've probably heard some version of both of these voices. The first shows up after a real win, the feature article, the funding round, the quarter that finally clicked. It says, asterisk you're finally arriving. This is who you actually are, asterisk the second shows up after a real loss, the launch that flopped, the client who left, the numbers that didn't lie. It says, asterisk this is who you actually are. The other version was luck, asterisk. Here's what almost nobody notices, those are the exact same lie, just pointed in opposite directions. Both tell you that an outcome gets to define you. Both are wrong for the same reason. Most people who build something get destroyed by one of these two forces eventually, the pride that real success breeds, or the shame that real failure generates. Rarely does anyone escape both. There's a figure in the Bible who lived through both extremes about as hard as a person can, genuine triumph, genuine catastrophe, sometimes only months apart, without either one deciding who he actually was. His name was David, and the pattern he shows us has almost nothing to do with winning. Start with the win, because it's the part everyone already half knows. A teenage shepherd walks out to face a professional soldier twice his size, armed with nothing but a sling and 5 stones. Before the first stone even leaves his hand, David says something worth actually stopping on. You are coming against me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the Israelite armies, which you have defied. This very day the Lord will put you in my power. Then the whole world will know that Israel has a God, and everyone here will see that the Lord does not need swords or spears to save his people. Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, I'm the best shot in Israel. He doesn't say, watch this. He names the actual source before the actual victory even happens. And after Goliath falls, David doesn't tour the countryside collecting praise. He goes back to serving under King Saul, doing the same unglamorous work he was doing before anyone knew his name. That restraint gets tested almost immediately. The women start singing in the streets, Saul has killed thousands, but David has killed tens of thousands. That's the kind of praise that reshapes a person, public, repeated, impossible to ignore. It didn't reshape David. It reshaped Saul instead, who got consumed by jealousy over a song, while David just kept showing up to serve the very king that jealousy was turning dangerous. More than once, David had a clean, defensible opportunity to kill Saul and take the throne everyone already knew was coming to him eventually. He walked away from it every time. Here's what's easy to miss in the years that follow, Samuel had already anointed David as the next king, privately, long before any of this. And instead of using that anointing to justify seizing power, David spent roughly 15 years as a fugitive, hiding in caves, running from Saul's army, living on the margins. 15 years is a long time to hold an identity that nobody around you can see yet. Then comes the part almost nobody talks about, because it doesn't make for a good highlight reel. David and his men return from a mission to find their own town, Ziklag, burned to the ground. Their wives and children are gone, taken by raiders. Scripture doesn't soften what happens next. David and his men started crying and did not stop until they were completely exhausted. Even David's own wives were among the missing. And then it gets worse. David was now in great trouble, because his men were all very bitter about losing their children, and they were threatening to stone him. Read that again. His own men, the loyal core who'd followed him through 15 years of caves, hunger, and exile, who had every reason to trust him by now, were talking about killing him. Nothing isolates quite like a leadership failure your own people blame you for. This is total loss, total blame, and total isolation, all landing on the same afternoon. Here's the turn that actually matters, but the Lord his God gave him courage. Before David does anything else, before he strategizes, before he addresses his men, before he acts, he stabilizes somewhere other than the crisis itself. Only after that does he ask the priest to bring the ephod and inquire of the Lord directly, shall I go after those raiders? And will I catch them? The answer comes back clear, go after them, you will catch them and rescue the captives. David pursues immediately, pushes through his own exhausted men's limits, and recovers everyone and everything that was taken. Here's what's easy to miss: stacking these two moments side by side, David's response to triumph and David's response to catastrophe are actually the same move, just running in opposite directions. In victory, he named God as the source before claiming credit himself. In devastation, he found strength in God before doing anything strategic at all. Both times, the first move was the same: locate yourself somewhere other than the outcome in front of you. That's the actual claim underneath this whole story. David's identity wasn't built on his win-loss record. If it had been, the Goliath victory would have made him unbearable, and Ziklag would have destroyed him completely. Either one alone is enough to wreck most people's sense of self, and David got hit with both, years apart but both real. He survived both because neither one was ever the foundation to begin with. The foundation was somewhere else the entire time, which meant the outcome, whichever direction it went, was information, not verdict. This matters for anyone running a business, because business runs on exactly this whiplash. A launch goes viral and you start believing your own hype. A launch flops and you start believing you were a fraud the whole time. Both reactions treat the outcome as the verdict on who you are. David's pattern suggests the outcome was never qualified to hand down that verdict in the first place. This tension shows up constantly in real businesses, and it's worth seeing what it actually looks like from both directions. In 2012, Sara Blakely became the youngest self-made woman on Forbes' billionaire list, built entirely on Spanx, a company she started with $5,000 in savings from a job selling fax machines door to door, and grew without ever taking outside investment or spending a dollar on traditional advertising. That kind of sudden, massive attention breaks a lot of people. Overnight, reporters start asking you to explain your own genius, and it's tempting to believe the flattering version. Blakely has talked publicly about a specific family ritual that seems to explain why it didn't break her. Growing up, her father would ask her and her brother at dinner what they'd failed at that week, and celebrate the attempt itself, not just whatever came of it. That habit reportedly helped her sit through roughly 200 rejections while trying to get her first prototype made, without those rejections ever becoming her identity, long before Forbes ever knew her name. In 2013, she became the first female billionaire to join the Giving Pledge, publicly committing the majority of her wealth to philanthropy rather than treating the number itself as the achievement. None of that reads like someone who let a magazine cover decide who she was. Here's the opposite direction. In February 2018, KFC's UK operations nearly collapsed overnight when a switch to a new delivery partner failed catastrophically. Roughly 800 of their 900 restaurants had to close because there was, functionally, no chicken. For a fried chicken chain, that's about as public and humiliating a failure as a brand can have. The story became international news within a day, exactly the kind of headline a company usually spends weeks trying to spin. KFC didn't deflect, didn't blame the delivery partner by name in the headlines, and didn't go quiet hoping the story would fade on its own. They took out a full-page newspaper ad with an image of an empty bucket, its logo rearranged to spell FCK, and a plain apology underneath, naming the problem for exactly what it was. No excuses, no legal department hedging. The ad became one of the most praised pieces of crisis communication in recent advertising history, precisely because it didn't try to protect anyone's image, including their own, and won industry awards for the very failure it was responding to. Neither story is really about the outcome. Blakely's $1 billion didn't inflate her identity, KFC's empty buckets didn't destroy theirs. Both moved through their moment, one spectacular, one humiliating, without the moment getting the final word on who they were. There's a description of David, given long after both Goliath and Ziklag were behind him, that names what was actually going on underneath both moments. Acts 13 verse 22 quotes God's own assessment, "I have found that David son of Jesse is the kind of man I like, a man who will do all I want him to do." Notice what that description isn't. It isn't a win-loss record. It isn't the man who killed Goliath or the man who recovered everything at Ziklag. It's a description of character and responsiveness, the same thing true of him on his best day and his worst one. Quick pause. If this is helpful, subscribe and turn on notifications. We're building a full biblical case for entrepreneurship, one principle at a time, and you'll want the rest of the series. So what does this actually look like this week, in your business specifically? First, the next time something genuinely good happens, a big client signs, a launch goes well, someone praises your work publicly, say out loud, to someone else, exactly what David said before Goliath even fell. Name the actual sources, the team, the timing, the mentor who opened the door, whatever else was really underneath it. Not as false modesty, and not as a performance of humility for an audience. As an accurate account, said plainly, the way you describe a fact. Second, the next time something genuinely bad happens, resist the urge to strategize first. David's sequence wasn't accidental, stabilize before you act, not instead of acting. That might mean a real 15 minutes of prayer before the damage control call, not as a delay tactic or an excuse to avoid the hard conversation, but because clarity earned that way tends to outlast panic-driven decisions made in the first adrenaline rush of a crisis. The men who wanted to stone David weren't wrong that the loss was catastrophic. David just refused to let their panic set his pace. Third, when you do respond to a failure publicly, to a client, a team, a market, take the KFC approach over the instinct to explain yourself out of it. Own it plainly, without minimizing, without deflecting to the vendor or the market or the unlucky timing, and without a paragraph of context nobody actually asked for. The apologies people actually trust, and actually forgive, are the short, direct ones, the ones that sound like they cost the person saying them something. None of these 3 steps depend on how the situation eventually turns out. That's the entire point. David didn't know Ziklag would end in full recovery when he stabilized first. He stabilized first because that's what the moment required regardless of outcome. This connects to something from an earlier video in this series, on Sabbath as a strategy, not a reward. The same principle is running underneath both studies, even though they look completely different on the surface. Sabbath rest isn't earned by a good week and cancelled by a bad one, it's built into the design regardless of performance, available on the week you closed the big deal and the week everything fell apart. David's identity worked the same way, not earned by Goliath, not cancelled by Ziklag, not up for renegotiation depending on how the quarter went. Rest you don't have to earn, and an identity you don't have to defend, turn out to be the exact same kind of trust, aimed at 2 different parts of the same problem. Success was never the point. Neither was avoiding failure. David's actual test, in both directions, was whether he'd stay tethered to something the outcome couldn't touch either way. This video shares biblical and pastoral principles on identity and resilience. It isn't a substitute for professional mental health care. If you're struggling, please reach out to a licensed counselor, doctor, or a crisis line in your area. If this was helpful, next time we're looking at what it actually means to build a team the way Moses learned to, under real pressure, from someone who saw the collapse coming before he did. Subscribe if you want to keep building this with us.